not a spider, actually. And it just does not move. No, this is not a computer bug, not a virus. Right, I'm going to have to actually flick in here. But Coping with crisis is the theme for this evening. I do want to welcome everyone this evening. This is the part of the Jepson Forum, and I'm Ken Ruscio, Dean of the Jepson School of Leadership Studies. As you know, we conduct this forum each year and try to select a topic focused on a very timely theme in the study of leadership. And of course, this year, crisis is very timely for us to be thinking about. Next year's theme, I'm happy to announce, has already been decided. It's going to be the American presidency. And some would say that there's really no difference between leadership in times of crisis and the American presidency. So we'll have great continuity in our themes. I'll be joining you a little bit later as we begin the question and answer period with Captain Lovell. But right now, I'd like to turn it over to the provost of the university, Aprille, for the introduction.
I want to add my official welcome from the University of Richmond to all of you. Most of you are no strangers to us. Welcome our alumni back, and of course our own students and faculty and friends. I'm glad you could join us for this special evening. Well, when I told Captain Lovell that I was going to introduce him, I said, I'm going to have to avoid gushing because at the time that the Gemini and Apollo space programs were going on, it was an important period of time in many of our lives. It was just the right time for me in terms of my education and training. It was so inspirational. All these gentlemen were heroes, and it's just terrific to meet one of them in person and to be hearing from them tonight. Well, I don't know where you were in 1962, but in September of that year, Captain Lovell was chosen for the space program following his extensive experiences as a naval aviator and test pilot. His various commands in the Gemini mission program included serving as the pilot on the Gemini 7 flight, backup commander for the Gemini 9 flight, commander of the Gemini 12 spacecraft. At the close of the Gemini program, Captain Lovell became command module pilot and navigator for the 6-day-long Apollo 8 mission, man's maiden voyage to the moon. He later served as backup commander to Neil Armstrong for the Apollo 11 lunar landing mission, and his fourth and final flight into space was as commander of the perilous Apollo 13 mission in 1970, which was a hair-raising time if you were around to follow that. In 1973, Captain Lovell left the space program to join the Bay Houston Towing Company, became president and CEO of Bay Houston in 1975, and later joined Fisk Telephone Systems, again as company president. The company was acquired by Centel Corporation in 1980, and Captain Lovell became executive vice president. Today, he is president of Lovell Communications, a business devoted to disseminating information about the U.S. space program. In 1994, Lovell and Jeff Kluger wrote Lost Moon, the story of the courageous mission of Apollo 13. Recently, I'm sure all of you are aware, the book was re-released as Apollo 13 Anniversary Edition to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Apollo 13 mission. How can it be that long ago? In 1995, the film version of the bestseller Apollo 13 was released to rave reviews. Some folks expected him to look like Tom Hanks. He does, sort of. Tom Hanks looks like him. That's a better way to put it. He appeared in several segments of Tom Hanks' From the Earth to the Moon, the acclaimed HBO documentary miniseries that aired in the spring of 1998. Captain Lovell, alas, is not a graduate of the University of Richmond, but he is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. The University of Southern California's Aviation Safety School and Harvard Business School's Advanced Management Program. He has earned many awards, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom, 2 the Distinguished Flying Crosses, and the Congressional Space Medal of Honor. It is an unbelievable privilege and pleasure to have you here. Please join me in welcoming Captain James Lovell.
to talk about the Apollo 13 story. And also, I want to give my congratulations to the Jepson School of Leadership, all they're doing, because what we really need in this country right now are good leaders. Apollo 13 is all about leadership. It's about those other human virtues that really turn failure into successes. Apollo 13 was not just another thrilling space adventure, but it was really a classic case of crisis management. It was a case where leadership, not just at the top, but all throughout the whole organization, that worked and brought up teamwork and got people working together, that fostered initiative and got perseverance going, because a lot of things that we do, we had to start all over again, and motivation. All these things started out with leadership, were the ingredients that got Apollo 13 from almost certain catastrophe to what I call a successful recovery. And so today, or tonight I should say, when I talk about Apollo 13, see if you can pick out those areas where good leadership really took hold, where those other virtues of teamwork and initiative and motivation and perseverance really became a factor to make me be able to give this talk tonight. Before I do, though, I thought I would digress just a little bit. I imagine a lot of you have seen that movie, Apollo 13, and you probably thought Tom Hanks was coming tonight. But when it first came out, when we sold the book to Imagine Entertainment, Ron Howard, the first thing they did was to go down to the Johnson Space Center to take a look around, to see how the mission control system was built, and to bring the cameramen down and the set designers, and to start talking to some of the people that were involved in the program Apollo 13, the flight directors and flight controllers. I have a home about 50 miles west of Austin, and so they knew I was down in that vicinity, and I got a call. They said, "Would you like to come on over and be one of the hosts?" And I said, "I'd be more than happy to." The only actor that was assigned to the movie at that time was a man by the name of Tom Hanks. And so as I came over, I met him, of course, and during the period that we were taking him through and showing him everything, he pulled me aside, and he said, "Jim, I have to know more about you. I have to know, your mannerisms and how you speak, and your idea of the flight from your perspective, so that I can accurately portray you, and relations with your wife and everything." I said, "Well, Tom, I have a home just west of Boston. Why don't you fly down and spend a weekend with us, and then you get to meet my wife. I have some videos and the accident report, and the flight manuals, and we kind of go over that. And you get a good flavor of the mission." He said, "Fine." So he flew into Austin. I was a small airplane, and so I flew over from our place called Horseshoe Bay and to pick him up. And when I got him in the airplane, I noticed that this fellow was kind of worried. Actors and actresses are sort of used to big corporate airplanes, 747s. But I kind of figured this guy was going to play the part of a naval aviator, a test pilot, and an astronaut. We got to get started right away. And so I got him in the airplane. Now the flight from Austin to Horseshoe Bay takes 15 minutes. I took an hour and a half. I try to think of those things I did years ago as a test pilot, approaches to stalls, unusual attitudes. I noticed he wasn't saying much over there, but he was hanging in. And finally, during a quiet part of the flight, I was flying along, and I, tried to think of something to say to him, and I said, "Tom," I said, when we heard you're going to be in this movie, Apollo 13, my wife and I ran out and saw your latest movie, Philadelphia." And he said, "No." I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Congratulations, you did a great job. You got the Oscar." And he said, "Thank you." And I was trying to keep the conversation going, and I was flying along, and I said, "Didn't you make another movie after Philadelphia?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "What was the name of that movie?" And he said, "Gump." I said, "Gump?" He said, "Yeah, Forrest Gump." Now, that movie had not yet been released. I knew nothing about the movie, so I said, "Tom, tell me about that movie. What's it all about?" And Tom Hanks proceeded to tell me the story of Forrest Gump. And I thought to myself, Houston, do we have another problem here? The movie was quite accurate, some artistic license taken into it, but basically we were all very, very happy about the movie. But now let me get on to some of the real aspects of Apollo 13. And to do that, I have to rewind the tape. I have to go back to 1961, Houston, Texas, Rice University. The young president got up to give a talk. And in that talk, he said, we plan to land a man on the moon and bring him back home safely before the end of the decade. President Kennedy made a very, very bold statement. 2 weeks before, we put up Alan Shepard in just a 15-minute suborbital flight. Had not yet put up anybody in Earth orbit, much less think about sending people to the moon. But if you go back and you read his speech, you sort of analyze the talk, you'll find out that this was not a project of scientific exploration to see what the moon consisted of. Maybe the origin of the solar system, or maybe the origin of the moon itself. No, this was not a scientific expedition. This was a technical challenge to the people of the United States and to the world that we had the ability to put someone on the surface of the moon and get him back home safely before the end of the decade. If you recall, back in those days, there's an idea that the United States was way behind in space technology, that the Soviet Union was way ahead. Well, you all know the story of Apollo. Thousands of people, hundreds of companies got together to start building this Apollo project to fruition. I was on the very first flight to the moon, Apollo 8. One of our major objectives was to look for suitable landing spots. We weren't going to land, of course, but to look for suitable landing spots, the flat areas, the seas of the mare that we call it, that would give the people who would make the first landing the greatest chance of survival. Consequently, the first flight, Apollo 11, landed in the Sea of Tranquility, a rather flat area of the moon. Then to prove to those people that really didn't believe that we did it, we sent Apollo 12 over to the Ocean of Storms, which was another sort of a mare or sea flat area. But by the time Apollo 13 came around, the scientific community came out of the woodwork. They said, look, wait a second. We've honored President Kennedy's commitment. We landed people on the moon. We got them back safely before 1970 rolled around. We have plenty of material from the mare or the sea. What we want is material from the hills or the highlands of the moon. Because if you look at the moon, in the hills or the highlands, the reflectivity is much brighter, the material might be different. They knew that ejecta was lying on the surface, thrown up by volcanism or by impact, that could tell us a lot about the interior of the moon. Consequently, Apollo 13 was designated to go to a place called Marrow. Around a large crater called Marrow, we're going to land in the hills or the highlands surrounding that crater. Take off on this flight, April 11th, 1970, at 13:13 Central Standard Time. Right there, I should have known. The big Saturn V took off. It's a three-stage rocket. Took off, and its first mission really is to get us into Earth orbit so we can check out the spacecraft before we'd ever commit them to the moon. The first stage worked perfectly, pushing us faster and faster. When it expended its fuel, we jettisoned it, came back down again, lit the 5 engines on the second stage of our three-stage rocket, pushing us faster and faster to get us into Earth orbit. But 2 minutes before it should have, the center engine suddenly shut down, stopped. What, is there a crisis here? You know, almost every spacecraft has some sort of a crisis going on. Instrument fails, the experiment doesn't work. Do we have enough fuel? Do we have enough power to get into Earth orbit and kick ourselves all the way to the moon? Well, fortunately, the folks at Huntsville overbuilt the vehicle. We had enough fuel, we had enough power to get us into Earth orbit. And by the way, the reason it shut down was the fact it was going divergent on the structure that it was attached to. And had we not had a safety switch that would shut it off, it would probably disintegrated, and then of course it would ruin our whole day. When we got into Earth orbit, now with just a third stage detached, came around, checked out our spacecraft, everything looked perfectly. As we got around to the far side of the Earth, away from the moon, we hit the third stage for a second time, and it gave us enough velocity and on the proper course to go all the way to the moon. That course, by the way, is called a free return course. Called free return because if something should happen to the spacecraft, for an example, if the maneuvered engine on our spacecraft failed to work in space, it had never been fired there before anyway, we were on a course that would take us all the way to the moon. Moon's gravity would swing us around, aim us back down towards the Earth. Just with the little attitude rockets of our spacecraft, we could hopefully make a safe passage through the atmosphere and a safe landing back on Earth. That's why it's called a free return course. Every flight, from Apollo 8 through Apollo 17, the last one, started out on this extra safety factor. About 30 hours have gone by, everything's working fine. We're doing our experiments, we're doing the navigation. You know, very tranquil flight. Got a call from Mission Control. Jim, if you want to land at this place called Frau, if you want the sun in the proper position, so as you come down in your lunar module, you can see the shadows of the rocks and boulders on the surface of the moon, and therefore you can maneuver to miss them for a safe landing. We'll have to get you off that free return course. Well, again, we looked around at the spacecraft. Everything's working fine, no problems at all, we said fine. And by the way, the two spacecraft are now married together. The lunar module, which was now powered down, we call it Aquarius. The command service module, we call Odyssey. And this is the vehicle, we're doing all the work, the maneuvering, and this is the mothership. But they're married almost nose to nose. And they told us the attitude to maneuver to, and we did. We lit that maneuvered engine. That was his test to begin with, to see if it worked. It worked fine. Moved us over to a new course to the moon, which we call the Hyman course to the moon. But now there's something should happen to the spacecraft. For an example of that engine that worked fine the first time, for some strange reason, gave up the ghost. We are on a course that would take us directly to the moon. Moon's gravity would swing us around and us back down towards the Earth. But the closest point of approach to the Earth would be about 40,000 miles out. Much too far out to be captured by the Earth's atmosphere for a safe landing. Didn't worry about it. Fourth flight into space, second time to the moon, the stars and sights, sounds, even the smells were so familiar to me that we settled back for a very tranquil, a very lethargic 3-day flight to the moon. Everything's working fine. 2 days went by. We were getting very complacent by this time, but suddenly I got jolted by the radio that said, Jim, have you looked at your flight plan? Now's the time to show a TV program for all those people back on Earth. You know, what you're doing up there. And I said, oh my gosh, you're right. I got out the TV camera. Fred Hayes was a lunar module pilot, and he swam through the tunnel that's connecting the two vehicles. The tunnel, of course, is now open. And he went into the powered down lunar module, and I followed the camera. And I was sort of photographing Fred as Fred was telling about the hammock he was going to sleep in on the lunar surface, and the backpacks that we had back there to wear while we were on the lunar surface, and all the switches that we had. But you have to remember, this was the third lunar landing flight. The signal came down from the spacecraft into the control center in Houston, fed out to all three networks. We didn't have CNN and Fox in those days, unfortunately. Nobody cared. We were competing on one network with, it was a live program, Dick Cavett, that's it. Well, it's live, and I could see, you know, he had those guests there, why they wouldn't carry us. Then on the second network, it was a rerun of I Love Lucy. And on the third network, at least in the city of Houston, Texas, the baseball game was going on, and everybody was watching the ball game, including, I think, the people in the control center. I, of course, did not realize what was happening. I did get a rather cryptic communique from the Capcom, who said, "Jim, we have a lot of work to do down here. Can you cut the program a little short?" I said, "Fine." Turned off the camera. I was coming back down through the tunnel, back into the mothership, when suddenly there was like this bang. The spacecraft rocked back and forth, and red lights started to come on, and jets were flying, and there's noise all over. I looked up at Fred Hayes to see if he knew what was causing all this commotion. And I could tell from his expression that he had absolutely no idea. Then I quickly looked at my third companion, a man by the name of Jack Smiker. Jack's eyes were as wide as saucers. Not only did he not know what was going on, but he was saying to himself, "Why am I here?" Because Swiker was not supposed to be there. Prime crew member for that spot was a man by the name of Kenneth. Just 4 days. 4 days before we were to take off, we discovered that the entire crew had been exposed to the measles. As a matter of fact, the backup lunar module pilot, Charlie Duke, had the measles. Well, Hayes and I, being married, we had kids that had the measles, and we had measles when we were children. We were immune to the disease. Mammy was a bachelor. Never been married, never had any kids, never had the measles. No doubt in the doctor's mind, he was going to come down with them just about the time he was by himself, orbiting the moon, waiting for Hayes and I to come up and rendezvous with him. Well, I argued with the doctors because, as I said earlier, what this was all about was leadership and teamwork and making sure that the flight was successful. And I said to them, I said, "You know, we know each other so well, we work so well as a team, that I don't want to lose him." As a matter of fact, it's so good that in our simulations, when he's in one simulator, Hayes and I are in the other, and we're simulating coming up to rendezvous, and the NASA folks give Manley a problem to see if he can solve it, we could tell from the inflection on his voice what was going on. So I argued with the doctors. I said, "Look, you know, I can't think of a better place to have the measles than a nice, cozy spacecraft going around the moon." You can imagine how far I got with that argument. Manley was dropped. Swiker was put on board. Now things in the spacecraft began to happen quite rapidly. A light came on, emergency light. Something was wrong with your electrical power. Before I could digest that piece of information, 2 more lights blinked on. 2 out of 3 of your fuel cells have just died. Now, a fuel cell is a device where we take liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen, combine them, we get electrical power and water. This was our major source of electricity. Our mission rule stated that if you lose just 1 fuel cell, the landing on the moon is off. But 1 fuel cell alone can comfortably get you around the moon and back home safely. So at that time, there was a wave of disappointment in the spacecraft. I mean, you know, really, this is my second time up here. The only reason I'm here is to land on the moon, and now I can't land. Then I drifted over to about the center of the spacecraft. I looked up at the instrument panel. My eyes happened to focus on the instruments that looked at the condition of 2 huge liquid oxygen tanks stored away in the back end of the spacecraft in an area which we call the service module. When I glanced at the quantity gauges of those tanks, one of them read 0. And when I quickly glanced at the second quantity gauge, I could see the needle start to go down ever so slightly, but something that you would never see on the normal usage of oxygen on a flight to the moon. And That's when that old lead weight went down to the bottom of my stomach. You know that searing sensation you get when you're in deep trouble and don't quite know how to get out of it? And then I went over to the left side, past Slightly, looked out the window, and when I looked out, and I can't tell you tonight why I did it, but when I looked out the window, I saw escaping at a high rate of speed a gaseous substance from the rear end of my spacecraft. And it didn't take much intelligence on my part to realize that the gas escaping and the needle in my second and last oxygen tank were one and the same. And fairly shortly, we'd be completely out of oxygen. And when that happened, because we used oxygen to produce electricity, the third fuel cell would die, we'd lose all our electrical power. And when that happened, because we used electricity to control and gimbal our rocket engine, we'd lose the entire propulsion system. We were in serious, serious trouble. We did have inside the spacecraft a small battery and a small oxygen tank, merely to be used for the final plunge through the Earth's atmosphere when we normally would jettison all the large consumables before we hit that atmosphere. By the time this explosion occurred, we were some 200,000 miles from Earth. We were 90 hours from Earth because we had to go around the moon to get back home again. Of course, we're going the wrong direction to begin with. Believe it or not, Mission Control could not believe what they were reading on their instruments. We sent down from the spacecraft by telemetry essentially all the things that we read up in the spacecraft. But they saw all these strange things now coming up on their instruments. And they thought, oh, this must be an interruption of the telemetry by a solar flare or something like that. Because, we don't lose 3 fuel cells, 2 oxygen tanks, the computer going offline, and lots of communication. I mean, all that just doesn't happen at one time. We have redundancy, and the odds of that, something like that going on is almost infinitesimal. Inside the spacecrafts, we knew what was going on. By the time the ground came to that conclusion that, there is something that's really strange here, we'll try to salvage the mission, but we better get this crew back on that free return course. Hayes and I had already met each other at that tunnel, climbing into that lunar module to see if we could somehow, some way, use it as a lifeboat to get home. I have to tell you a little bit about that lunar module. It's a very fragile device. Maybe a lot of you have seen it, museums or pictures of it. Not designed to come home, not to come home wall. No heat shield. Skin is so thin, if you so desired, you can take your fist and punch a hole right through it. It's designed to only last 45 hours. Once you're in lunar orbit, you power it up. 2 people get in the lunar module, go down, land, explore, get back in, take off, rendezvous, dock, throw the vehicle away. Designed to only support 2 people. And after the explosion, they kept counting the crew all the time. I said, 1, 2, 3. Oh boy. Anyway, we forgot about how long it was going to last. Got in there, turned on all the electronic devices, the computer, the guidance system, the autopilot, things like that. It used batteries, by the way, not fuel cells. Meanwhile, the ground called up and we started conversing, and the teamwork started to come on in that I mentioned. This leadership, Gene Krantz and his Tiger team, got the people together, got the contractor people in to see if they had ideas, got some other NASA folks together to find 2 things. What went wrong and how do we get these guys home? But more important was, how do we salvage? How do we get these people home? What's the problems here? And so we got a call. They said, look, we want to get you back on that free return course. We think that's a good idea. I said, I concur with you. By this time, the command service module is completely dead. Battery's dead, everything gone. And so we're flying by the lunar module now. We're in this lunar module. And they said, okay, we're thinking up the attitude for you to maneuver to using the lunar module. We want you to use the engine that you would normally use to land on the moon. We call it the descent engine. And we use that to move you over to this new course back on the free return. I said, fine. So they told me the attitude to maneuver to. And When I started to do that, I learned something that I took with me from the public sector into private business in the private sector. Something that all of you should keep in the back of your mind. Always expect the unexpected. Because when I started to maneuver, and remember I had been maneuvering lunar modules and simulators for hundreds of hours, and I wanted to pitch down to get the thing started, it went to some wild gyration. If I wanted to go right with my attitude controller, it went left. If I wanted to go up, it went down. What's going on here? This is something completely unexpected. You know, how can I control this? Then it dawned on me that I had a 60,000-pound dead mass hanging on the end of the lunar module. The command service module, the only vehicle that had a heat shield that I could get back into the Earth with. The lunar module had never been designed to be maneuvered with a command service module attached to it. In a short period of time, I literally had to learn how to maneuver all over again. In other words, I had to know what the output was going to be when I put the input into the maneuvering handle. But you'd be surprised how quickly you'll learn when you're in deep trouble. Finally got to the proper attitude, lit that descent engine, worked perfectly, moved us over to what we thought was the free return course. Now by this time, we're getting close to the moon. 25, 30,000 miles away, starting to speed up as the moon started to pull. We're under the moon's influence now. Its gravity is greater than the gravity of the Earth. I looked over at Fred Hayes. He was making some computations on the back of a little envelope. He said, Jim, he said, I don't have to tell you this. You probably already know it. We're not going to get home. He says, the batteries, the most important thing, they're going to die before we get back home. Water, too, is very, very important, not just to drink, but I mean, we have to have water to cool all these electronic systems. He said, we might have enough oxygen left because we have the backpacks back here, and since we're not going to be on the lunar surface, we can tap into those. I said, Fredo, you're absolutely right. The way we are right now, the condition we're in, there's no way we're going to make it. While we're up there trying to figure out, is there anything that we can do, and looking at the moon as it's getting bigger and bigger, and I call back to the ground, they say, we're working on it, we're thinking of something. And finally, they called up, and they said, Jim, we've been looking at the situation very carefully. We've been looking at all the aspects of it, what we think went wrong, how we think we can salvage this whole thing, and we've all come to the conclusion down here, you're not going to get home. I said, I've already come to that conclusion, but you have a solution. I need solutions. And they said, what do we do? Once the moon pulls you around to the far side, you go around the moon and come back again, and brings you back down towards the Earth. We'll have you light that descent engine a second time. Keep it on for a long period of time, and perhaps we can speed up your return home to get you back to the Earth before those batteries die. That's the most important thing. I said, fine. I said, we don't have any better idea up here. They said, well, don't get your hopes up. We just sat down and pulled up this thing. We're sending a crew now down to the simulators to run through the procedures, and if they look promising, we'll send you up the instructions. I said, fine. They said, well, now you're getting close to the moon. When the moon starts to pull you around to the far side, you lose communication with us, so be ready to copy us as soon as we get some information. I said, I have my 2 companions right with me, have 6 ears. If I miss something, they'll be listening very intently, they'll be able to get it. They said, fine. So while we waited sort of nervously, and pretty soon we got the call. They said, yeah, we think this system is okay. I'm ready to copy the instructions. And I said, I am. And I started to copy, thinking my companions were hanging on to every word. And I kind of looked over at them. They weren't paying any attention. They were looking at the moon. They had cameras in their hands. One guy was looking up shutter speeds. The other guy was trying to figure out aperture settings. I said, gentlemen, what are your plans here? They said, Jim, as we go around to the far side of the moon, we're going to take some pictures because, as you know, we never see the far side from the Earth. I said, if we don't get home, we won't get them developed. said, doggone it, you have been here before. We haven't. We want to take some pictures for our folks. I got the instructions. They got the photography. And we went to the backside 2.5 hours after we passed the far side of the moon. Lit the descent engine a second time, kept it on for 4.5 minutes as it pushed us faster, faster, faster on the way home. Then we shut it down. Then we shut down all those exotic electronic devices that you would not be caught out there without. The guidance system told you your attitude with respect to the celestial sphere. Needed it for navigation. Too much power, turn it off. The computer, and in its memory we had all the information of the stars we needed to navigate. Shut it down, lost its memory, couldn't afford it. The autopilot, the stabilizing device to help me maneuver these two ungainly vehicles together, had to turn it off too, used up too much electricity. The only thing we had going for us now was the radio to talk to the Earth and a little fan to circulate the atmosphere in the spacecraft. Things were kind of quiet. And when things are quiet, with not much to do, and you're in a tight spot, you start to think. Maybe that's bad. Schweiker came and he said, Jim, we might be exceeding escape velocity. Let me explain that if I can. I walk outside of this building, baseball in my hand, pretend the atmosphere is not there, and if I can throw that baseball out into space a little over 25,000 miles an hour, the baseball will not come back to the Earth, will not go into orbit about the Earth, but will eventually escape from the Earth and go into an orbit about the Sun. I said, Jack, don't worry, don't you recall? We're on that free return course again. That course should guarantee a safe passage through the atmosphere and a safe landing back on Earth. How does it do it? Let's pretend that the top of the atmosphere is this little flat, a little section is flat. To make a safe landing, we have to hit the atmosphere inside a 2-degree pie-shaped wedge with respect to the atmosphere. That pie-shaped wedge can't be any less than 5.5 degrees, any greater than 7.5 degrees. We have to come inside that 2-degree pie-shaped wedge to come on in and make a safe landing. If we come in too shallow, we skip out, like skipping a stone on water, and we're gone. If we come in too steep, the sudden acceleration hitting the atmosphere would make us a fiery meteor for a few brief seconds, and that would be it. I said, Jack, relax, don't worry, I think we're in good shape. Sit back, enjoy the flight. I was wrong. About 102 hours after we had taken off, coming back down, ground tracking us, I got a call. And they said, Jim, we don't know what you're doing up there. We thought we had this thing wired, but you're no longer on the free return course. We extrapolated your course all the way back to the Earth, and as close as we can determine right now, you're going to miss the atmosphere by at least 60 to 80 nautical miles. I said, thanks a lot. I said, we turned off our navigation equipment. We don't have the power to get it back on again. We're flying by the seat of our pants up here. And they said, Jim, you know, we understand that. We've been thinking about it for some time now. They said, do you remember those emergency procedures in the back of the Apollo 8 flight manual, that very first flight to the moon? Because even though we were very confident in everything we did, but we thought if the navigation system did fail, or the communication system failed to work way out of the moon, and everything else was no good, these procedures in the back were your last resort, but we put them in. I said, yeah, I remember those. In fact, I helped develop them back there in Apollo 8, but after Apollo 8, we thought they were so way out, so unnecessary, so useless, that we tore them out of the flight manuals just to save weight. You're going to have to use them now. What that consisted of, and this, by the way, is the entire procedure, for those of you taking notes, in case you happen to get caught out there like I did, like you did, is for me to somehow manhandle the two spacecraft around, not having an autopilot or a stabilizing device to help me, but to try to maneuver the spacecraft around to get the Earth in the window of the lunar module. Now, you have all seen pictures of the Earth from space. You see the daylight, you see the nighttime, and the line between the two we call twilight here as it passes overhead. Out there, we call it the terminator. In my window, the little module, I had a gun sight, a little crosshair, used normally for rendezvous and docking. If I could somehow maneuver the spacecraft around to get the Earth in the window, and then superimpose the horizontal line of my crosshair on the Earth's terminator, that would then place the engine in a position to either steepen up or shallow out that angle on the way home, depending on whether I had the Earth's daylight or darkness at the top of my window, and if I lit the engine just at the right time. That was the entire procedure. I looked at Swiper. Everything on the spacecraft now stopped. I said, Jack, even the clock isn't running, but you do have a wristwatch. You tell me when to start the engine, you tell me when to turn it off. He said, okay. I looked over at Fred Hayes, and Hayes was getting sick at the time, but I said, Fred, I know that when that engine comes on, without an autopilot to help me, I will never be able to keep the Earth in the window by myself. I'll take the primary controller, I'll keep the Earth going up and down too much, you grab the backup, you keep the Earth going sideways too much. He said, fine. On the side of my console, I had two buttons. One said start, the other one said stop. These were emergency buttons, direct electrical link between the battery and the engine. Normally that link goes from the battery to the computer that does all the work, then to the engine. Couldn't afford it. This was probably the one and only time these two buttons were ever used. At the proper time, Jack said start, hit the start button. Engine came on, I jockeyed the Earth vertically, Fred jockeyed it horizontally. 14 seconds later, Jack said stop, and I hit the stop button, and then we waited. We waited for the ground to track us to see whether we got back up into that corridor to come back in and make a safe landing. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I wouldn't have the pleasure of being here in Richmond and talking to you folks if I didn't make it back home safely. We actually landed in the Pacific Ocean where we should have landed had this been a normal mission, except we got there a couple days early. Now, I brought with me a short video of some of the highlights of what I've been talking about. Now, this was made for Congress in 1970. You know, they investigate everything. Unfortunately, this was a nice investigation. It was made with 16mm film, so it's not the best quality in the world. But whenever you're ready, we can see that. And if you want to get the lights in it, it's hard to see. I will narrate it for you. It's silent, by the way. We call it a quick look for Congress. That's our Saturn V right there. One of the tragedies of our space program was not to keep building these vehicles after the Apollo program. This vehicle could put more mass in a low Earth orbit and be a perfect supply vehicle for our International Space Station. But we couldn't build one of these now for our life depended on it. The material, the planes, and everything are gone. That's Fred Hayes getting suited up. Next to Fred is Jack Schweiker, still trying to figure out how he got on the flight. And then next to Jack is myself. Notice now that we are fully suited up. We're carrying tanks of oxygen. We're purging our bodies of nitrogen so that we wouldn't get the bends as we go into space, because in those days we flew the spacecraft at low pressures. We learned something from the Russians, and now if you see a shuttle crew get out of the building, into the van, they will not be having their helmets on, they will not be carrying tanks of oxygen, because we now fly the shuttle at sea level pressure, something the Russians have always done, so we learned something from that. This Saturn V on launch day is kind of eerie to go to, filled with 5.5 million pounds of explosives. Only a couple nervous checkout people and the crew are anywhere near there. Everybody else happens to be a comfortable 3.5 miles away. Here they are. Now you have to remember, this is 1970, not 2004. You're not going to find laptop computers, CDs, floppy disks, or any of that stuff there. But we did have mainframe terminology, mainframe computer terminology, and computers, so that the last 6 minutes of the countdown were actually controlled by computer to make sure everything's going. About 5 or 6 seconds before liftoff, the engines are ignited. Now this next sequence is slow motion, and those of you who've seen the movie can compare with the movie. The flaking material are ice crystals formed by the high humidity of the Cape and the liquid oxygen inside the tank. There goes the hold on arm. Now notice as we take off, look at these small fins right here. We actually control this vehicle by gimballing the 4 outer engines. And those small fins are really more or less like ornaments on your automobile, I think. Dr. Von Braun, who built the V2 weapon in World War II that needed fins, was also instrumental in building this vehicle, and I think that's his signature on there. We certainly don't need fins. We're producing 7.5 million pounds of thrust, about the same as the present-day shuttle, except this vehicle weighs more. Consequently, the acceleration is slower. Actually, it's a very comfortable airplane, or very comfortable rocket to ride on, because the acceleration is slow. We call it the old man's rocket. We're burning fuel now at the rate of 15 tons per second. That's about as much as my 73 Chevrolet back then. Actually, it took us about a minute and a half longer to get into orbit than normally because of the loss of the engine on the second stage. Now let's pretend that you're all in the command module. You're looking out the window. You're sitting on Jack Schweiker's lap. Jack's job is to make the lunar module with the command service module. You're looking now at the third stage of our big booster that's following us to the moon. And tucked into that third stage is our lunar module. Jack's job is to put a probe, which we cannot see, into that funnel-like affair called the drone. He used the same gun sight that I mentioned, plus the target right here, to guide themselves in. And as we get closer, look how flimsy, look how crinkly this vehicle is constructed. And contrary to the movie, Jack Schweiker was a very competent pilot. We had all the faith in him after we trained with him a couple days. And now shortly you'll see the shadow of the probe come across the skin of the lunar module as Jack drives the 2 vehicles into a hard dock. It's only about 0.2 of a foot per second. Here it comes. Now we draw the lunar module from the third stage. The third stage is, of course, still following us to the moon without the lunar module. The ground has taken control of it, changed its course slightly. It impacted the moon. The force of the impact was picked up by a device called a seismometer left by the Apollo 12 crew. And we learned a lot about the structure of the lunar surface. And that, by the way, was the only successful experiment on this flight. Now you're in the control center in Houston. You're all sitting there. You're all watching that TV program that no one else wanted to watch. And then as the camera swings around, look at the complacency on the flight crew. We're just about ready to change shifts. And that guy, I think, is really asleep right there. And finally, I got the word, shut down the camera. Then the explosion occurred. I had to say goodbye to the moon. My wife, by the way, was in the control center, left just prior to the explosion, and it happened when she was on her way home. Now you're in the dark command module. You have a movie camera going with a wide-angle lens, but the only light we have is coming in through the window right there because the sun just happened to be in the proper position. Otherwise, the sky is a velvet black. As the camera swings around, you'll see the hatch right here that normally closed the tunnel between the 2 vehicles. We now have it tied to a couch, and so Fred Hayes will take you through that tunnel into the lunar module where Jack and I are trying to figure out how to get home. Now notice that in space there is no up or down. To what is one man's right side up is to another man's upside down. Once your stomach gets used to it, it's a lot of fun. It can take about 6 hours for the average individual, otherwise you feel a little bit seasick. But you can play with things and bounce things around. Actually, the lunar module looks bigger than it really is because of that wide-angle lens. Now back at the control center in Houston, as I mentioned, the teamwork started taking place. Procedures that normally took weeks to develop and weeks to test are now being done in just hours, and they had to be done right the first time. All sorts of people are called in to try to get their best idea of what to do to get back home again. Even astronauts are called back in. Even Kent Manley, who was supposed to get the measles, was called back in. That's Kent right there. Can you imagine his emotions? Highly disappointed to be kicked off the flight. secretly elated he wasn't out of an explosion. If you noticed, I was rubbing my hands right back down there. The normal way we control the temperature in a spacecraft is to balance the heat thrown off by the electrical equipment with excess heat being dissipated into space. With all the electrical equipment shut down, though, the temperature kept dropping all the way home. It got down to about 34 degrees Fahrenheit, about the temperature of your refrigerator by the time we got home. And finally, there's Fred taking our picture by holding his arm out with the camera. Now here's where initiative or imagination took place. In the lunar module, we had lithium hydroxide canisters to remove the carbon dioxide, which is poisonous at high concentrations. And certainly it was getting poisonous because we only had enough canisters for 2 people for 2 days. And yet we were 3 people for 4 days. And so we had a jury-rigged square canister that came out of the command module, and we did it with tape, plastic, cardboard, and an old sock to work in the lunar module, which prevented us from getting poisoning and made us get home safely. Another case of where imagination or initiative really took place. Doctors too were quite worried about us. My heart rate got up to 130 at the time of the explosion. I did remove all my biomed instrumentation so they wouldn't know how scared I was. I think I have a little Sony tape recorder, and I had the tapes from the space movie 2001. I played it. I also had the tape, the tape from that other space movie Maroon. That wasn't about to play that one. There's the Earth going by at 110,000 miles out. If you so desired, you could have put your thumb up and completely hide the Earth. That tells you how insignificant we really all are. I had the duty, that's Jack trying to get sustained in the tunnel area, going to the command module. And over on the far left side, as the camera swings around, you'll see Fred Hayes keeping his hand in his blouse. On another flight, another astronaut by the name of Pete Conrad was flying in a completely darkened spacecraft trying to get some sleep. He woke up, he saw this strange eye staring him in the face. Scared him half to death. He never believed in UFOs. He said, my gosh, maybe this is a UFO. Turned out that his arm had drifted up. He was looking at the luminous dial on his wrist. That's how those stories get started, folks. Here are 3 nervous men trying to figure out where to store urine for 4 days because they said, don't jettison anything over the side. It might change the course of the spacecraft. And finally, back at the control center in Houston, that final last maneuver that we talked about, and that's Gene Kranz getting things squared away. That's the Terminator that we used to guide ourselves back in. Now this is a couple of still photos. Normally we would jettison the service module, which we did before we hit the atmosphere, but when it drifted out by, we saw the entire panel right there had been blown off. Scared us half to death because if that explosion had blown off that panel, it might have ruptured the heat shield behind us, and if that was the case, we'd have burned up coming through the atmosphere. But the heat shield remained intact. Came through the last crisis of this flight with those 3 parachutes. The pyrotechnics to fly them out, to put them out, had been cold soaked for 4 days because we could not afford the electrical power to keep them warm. If they hadn't deployed, we'd hit the water a lot harder than we're seeing here. This is taken by a helicopter. The ship's about a mile and a half away. And when the ship saw that we didn't keep going down, they radioed the control center in Houston, said that the safety on the water, and everybody there, of course, is happy. I think they very quietly tore up all the elaborate obituaries they had planned. And finally, a helicopter came by and tried to put the swimmers in the water, which you see right here, and to put a little flotation device around the spacecraft so that it wouldn't sink when we opened the hatch. This helicopter, by the way, number 66, is kind of a famous one, picking up about 4 or 5 crews. When Ron Howard did the movie, the Navy didn't have those helicopters any longer. Ron Howard found a surplus civilian model, had it repainted Navy 66 for the final sequences of the movie. And if you were alive in 1970 and had your TV on, you saw a recovery of an Apollo crew for the first time since we had an uplink on the ship to a satellite that permitted TV coverage. And there we are coming out of the helicopter, waved to the skipper. And then next to the skipper is the chaplain right there. He gave a prayer of thanks for the millions and millions of people who prayed for our safe return. Some 55 countries 55 countries offered water assistance stores, water recovery assistance stores. Even countries like Paraguay and Czechoslovakia. They don't even have coastlines. I didn't know how they were going to do that. In the control center in Houston, after every successful flight, we shake hands, and they used to smoke cigars. They don't do that anymore. And through that same satellite system, I was able to talk to my wife via the telephone, and so was Fred Hayes. And I forgot to mention Jack Swagger. Jack Swagger was also a bachelor, talking to every single stewardess on Eastern Airlines. Shouldn't be here to talk to you tonight. 200,000 miles from Earth, going in the wrong direction, losing everything, oxygen, electrical power, everything getting low. Why am I here? I'm here because of a dedicated group of men. Control Center in Houston, working with 3 dedicated people up the spacecraft, figuring out solutions to crisis that we never contemplated, we never planned, we never trained for. I mentioned those attributes are so necessary, and why I'm so happy to say that there's a leadership school here, because they foster the good leadership that gets teamwork, that gets people to start thinking, to use their initiative, that gives people the perseverance to keep charging ahead if things look wrong, and the motivation to keep going. That's the lesson here today. I'll leave you with a little saying that I heard. I guess a lot of you probably heard it, but it's kind of apropos. 3 types of people in this world. People that make things happen. People that watch things happen, and people that just wondered what happened. Control Center, in April 1970, there were people that made things happen. And I'm happy to see the Jepson School of Leadership is making things happen too. Thank you very much.
We have some time for questions and probably a few answers as well. So I think we have microphones that are up front here, and maybe I'll try to get them around a little bit as we, maybe you should raise your hands, and I'll get the microphone out to you. So you want to come on up and start us off?
Go ahead and answer it. I'll repeat it.
I have 2 questions. First of all, I guess they're both personal feelings of yours. On Apollo 8, when you first went to the moon, all of us in this room can only imagine what goes through your mind when you come face to face with the moon and the Earth on the way back. And the second question is, on a lighter note, since people have already started talking about this with Mars and the rovers, a lot of people say, not a lot of people, but some of the conspiracy theorists say, well, they're just shooting pictures in Death Valley and putting them on TV. What do you say to those people? Or have you ever run into one of them, and what have you said to them?
Okay, 2 questions. The first time, Apollo 8 was actually the high point of my space career. 13 was the most challenging, but the first 3 people to go to the moon, to see the far side, which we'd never see, of course, from the Earth, to be so close, 60 miles, to see those ancient old craters go by, to do it at a very opportune time. I mean, if a script writer was trying to write the perfect script, he couldn't have done any better. Those of you who were alive in 1968, of course, remember 1968 was not a very good year in this country. Vietnam War was going on. There were 2 or 3 assassinations of prominent people. Riots in Chicago because of the elective thing that was going on. Everything was happening. But at the last part. At the very last part of that year, 3 people took off on a spacecraft, circled the moon, read on the last one of the moon from the 10 verses of Genesis from the Old Testament. Couldn't think of a more opportune or appropriate time to do it. And of course, the Old Testament was the foundation of many of the world's religions, not just the Christian religion, but many of the world's religions. That was the first part, and that's why I think Apollo 8 was really the high point of part of our milestones of our space career. The second part about is the conspiracy theory. You know, those pictures you see of those little rovers, and you see all that nice orange thing. Was that done in an abandoned aircraft hangar out in Marfa, Texas, out there? Well, there are conspiracies all the time. I'll give you a very interesting story. I gave a talk one time in Sacramento. I thought it was a very educated audience. In fact, it was a day seminary on a seminar, I should say, on leadership and in business. 2 people came up to me and said, you know, Captain Lovell, we don't really believe you went to the moon. What am I going to say? I just gave the talk that you just heard. And they said, no. And they said, first of all, look at that flag in the picture. Look at this out there flag. You know, it would not be waving like that because there's no atmosphere. There's no wind. I said, for your information, there's a stick at the top of that flag that's holding the flag out there. And look, you don't see these stars, you know, in these pictures taken. I said, for your information, the aperture setting was set at the light of the moon. You don't see stars in the daytime on the Earth, do you? And anyway, to make a long story short, there are still people who think that we never went to the moon. So believe me, ladies and gentlemen, those rovers are on Mars. And it's miraculously that they can do that. And I hope that they get them both working so that we see a lot more about the Martian territory. And it amazes me all the time, too. We will know more about Mars through robotic and orbiting spacecraft than we did about the moon when we put men on the moon for the first time. And when men finally get to Mars, and women, we'll know more about it than we did about the moon. So eventually, I don't think it'll be in my lifetime, but eventually I think we will get to Mars. Anything else?
I'll tell you what, you're closer over there, so why don't you head on up to that microphone?
Oh, what happened to Fred Hayes and Jack Swigert after the flight? Jack Swigert eventually went into politics. He ran, first of all, for a Senate seat from Colorado and did make it. Then they redistricted Colorado, and he ran as a representative, and he was elected. During his campaigning, they discovered he had a form of cancer. I think it was lymphoma. I think that was it. And just before he was sworn in January of the next year, I think it was 83, he died. So he died back in 83. Fred Hayes continued on, didn't make any more flights, retired. Actually, he did not the suborbital, but just the landing training flights for the shuttle, going up on top of the 747 and then dropping off and practicing the landings. Then he retired, went to work for Grumman Aircraft, stayed there until he retired for Grumman, and now is retired in near Houston, Texas.
A lot of people have a dream or an idea to do something, whatever it is for them, that might be the equivalent of what you
Can you speak up a little bit for me?
Yes, a lot of people have a dream to do something like what you did, or an equivalent for them that would be the pinnacle of this or that. What constellation of events and characteristics got you there?
What constellation am I in?
Yeah, that would be an answer. Yes.
I wasn't quite sure. I'm an Aries, if that makes any difference.
I apologize. The constellation of events and your characteristics that got you there.
Okay. I'll tell you how I got into this whole thing. I enjoyed science and math in school. I enjoyed the sky. I learned all the constellations. And high school, I, for some reason, was very entranced and thrilled about rockets. Now, this was the time, and I read about Robert Goddard before the World War II. He was developing rockets in New Mexico. Then, towards the end of the war, we had a captured V-2, and I read all about Von Braun, the work that he did. I tried to build a rocket in high school. A couple of us got together, and it was the chemistry teacher who gave us the encouragement to continue on and do it. And I've always praised the teachers who give their students encouragement to do things that really appear to be almost impossible. We started out to build a liquid fuel rocket of all things, which, you know, in high school was impossible. But he didn't say, hey, forget it. He said, why don't you go build a powder rocket? We'll tell you how to do it, the whole thing. So I did. So I got very much interested. In fact, I wanted to become a rocket engineer. And I wrote in 1946 to the Secretary of the American Rocket Society, how do I become, what school do I have to go to, what courses do I have to take to become a rocket engineer? This is just after, of course, World War II. I got a nice letter back from him, but essentially what it said is to take mathematics, thermodynamics, mechanics, things like that, and then go to Caltech or MIT. I have to tell you, I couldn't go to either one. As a matter of fact, I didn't have the money to go to college. The Navy came through. And at that particular time, a man got up on the stage here in the high school and said, we're looking for naval aviators. After the war, more naval aviators left the service than they anticipated. And there's a thing called a Holloway program where you get 2 years of college, and then you go down to Pensacola, get your wings, go out as an aviation midshipman for 6 months at sea, and then you get commissioned and go back into your last 2 years of college. Here's a time where I could get my college. So I got in. I got my 2 years and a year and a half, actually, at the University of Wisconsin. I went down to go to pre-flight. And about that time, I had applied several times to go to the Naval Academy, but I was always an alternate. And I got a set of orders from the Navy saying, if you still want to go to the Naval Academy, you know, report to the Naval Academy at such and such a date. Actually, I was in a dilemma right there. I already had 2 years of college. I was already going to learn to fly. I was already a midshipman at that particular time. But there was an old captain down there, just like that teacher, pulled me aside and said, look, son, if you want to make the Navy your career, if you want to get your college education now, get up to the Naval Academy. I did that, and I graduated 2 years later from my contemporaries, but then I went back into flight training. And then I still was interested in rockets. But I was in flying now, and I enjoyed that. And then what happened in 1958? NACA, the old Navy thing, that was the National Aeronautics group that worked with airplane manufacturers, became NASA. And they decided they wanted to put a man in space. And so they looked to see who they would get. And President Eisenhower suggested test pilots because first of all, they have the clearances and they've been testing airplanes. I had just finished test pilot school. And my career started to converge like this. And NASA sent out 110 applications from the Air Force and the Navy. We all met in Washington, D.C., and I felt like I got up and talked about putting a man on top of an Atlas rocket. And of course, Atlas rockets were blowing up every other day down Cape Canaveral. But I thought to myself, this is it. This is what I want to do. My gosh, I couldn't ask for anything better. And so I got down to the last 32 people to be selected for the Berkeley program. I flunked the physics. Only guy to flunk the physics. Couldn't believe it. Had something like a high bilirubin in my blood, which was due to, they thought either hepatitis, malaria, or yellow jaundice, or something like that. Anyway, so I came back to the Navy, told my good friend, the flight surgeon, what it was. He put me in the hospital. He said, that's nothing. Don't worry about it. Because the other 7 people made the Berkeley program, the Glens, the Shepherds, the Grissons. But 2 years later, the Navy needed more, or the NASA needed more people. And they sent out another call. The Navy called me and said, do you still want to apply? Because the Navy didn't know anything about that physical I flunked it with NASA. And I said, sure. So I applied. This time I took an Air Force physical, and they were a lot more. I learned a lot more. And I got it the second time around. And it's kind of a coincidence, but on the Gemini 12 flight, my second flight, Buzz Aldrin was with my companion. We both have high bilirubin. Still have it today. Ready?
Thank you for coming tonight. We're all enjoying this discussion a lot. One of the questions I wanted to ask, particularly for the students here who are charting their courses of studies, is do you believe it's better to specialize or generalize at the undergraduate education and then, of course, in graduate specialize? But do you believe it's better to be a specialist or a generalist as you begin to chart your course? Thank you.
Now that's a very good question. That's the first time that question has ever been asked. But my own personal opinion is that I think in your undergraduate work that it's better to generalize. I think that you, at least for the first 2 years, and I'll tell you why. I think really what you're here for is to learn to study. What you really learn to be an expert at later on in careers or in your graduate work or something is what you do at that time. In the first couple of years, and I think most colleges are aimed that way, whereby you take certain courses to generalize, to get your idea and get your way of learning how to study and to think and to get your mind coordinated so that as you tackle greater things later on in your college career and you're going into grad school, that you can be prepared to handle that. And so that's my own personal opinion, but you asked for it. This gentleman down here wants to say something. Go ahead, I'll read it.
I'd like to hear your comments about the discussion that's going on right now between manned flight and robotic flight out into space.
That's an age-old argument. The question was, could I discuss the comments between manned flight and unmanned flight? Obviously, we're seeing very good results with our lunar rovers and all that they can do. Well, is it necessary to put man up there? After all, we have to man rate the rockets. We've got to bring them back. We don't have to bring the robots back. And so, but, you know, when we have the problem with Spirit, when suddenly, you know, it refused to send things back, there was a man there. He could have tweaked it off a little bit and said, oh, there we are. Because we haven't built a computer yet as cheaply and as complicated as the human brain. And consequently, a lot of things that happen on the Mercury flights, a lot of them were successful because there were people on board to figure out what was happening or be there. And what would happen to Apollo 13 had we not been there? If that had some other mission to it besides landing 3 guys on the surface of the moon. Could we have done all the things that Mission Control told us? Would they have all the devices up there? There is a place for unmanned flights, and you're seeing it now very nicely. The robots going to Mars, and the ones that went to the moon prior to man getting there. The men will go, and you pin me now and say, now Jim, tell me, why should a man ever want to go to Mars if those robots can tell us what's there and what's not there? And I'll tell you, I don't know the scientific reason, but I know that it's possible to go there, man, and man is going to go there. Because it's the nature of the humans to explore, and you'll see, probably not in my lifetime, but you'll see eventually flights to Mars.
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Here we go.
You want to name it?
Commander Lovell, I'm an Aries 2. Kudos to you and your achievement. WCB News, you just mentioned part of my question. Although it's been human nature since recorded history to seek out foreign lands and how to explore planets in our own solar system, how can we justify spending the dollars it takes, the billions, to implement when there are so many economic and social, political unsolved problems which could be utilize this money?
Okay, did you all hear the question? Why should we spend money in space when we have so many problems here on Earth to spend the money? We don't spend 1 cent in space. Not 1 cent is spent in space. It's all spent right here on Earth. Now, I types of programs that the government runs, of course. Defense, but we also run programs like education. We also run programs that are non-creative programs. Food supplements, housing that we have to subsidize. Things that we need to do to help the people of this, the less fortunate people, to make a living, to stay alive and enjoy life. The government's job is to make sure that they have a reasonable sense of good living. But they're not creative. They don't create taxes because they're a one-way street with regards to tax money. But all the space activity that we've done does create taxes, both individual taxes of people who work there, thousands and thousands, corporate taxes that come back into the Treasury that also provide monies for those things that we do not see a return on. And other things besides the spin-offs that are a multitude of spin-offs that everybody has enjoyed. In fact, some of the earlier ones was the seed money that we put into the computer technology that we now, everybody has benefited from computer technology. But some of that, to make the systems small enough for the rockets and some of the stuff we've done was a result of rocket or of space technology. But there's other things that are intangible too. Education, the spur of education, when in 1957, the Russians put up Sputnik, and everybody said, how could they do that? They don't have the schooling or the total intelligence like we thought we had. Where did they get all this information to put up a satellite? What's wrong with our educational system? Where are our scientists? Where are our engineers? Well, we had them. We can do it. But that spur from the very beginning has propagated all the way through our educational systems right to today. I went to a school one time. It was a grade school in 4 sections, sort of a lower income group, but each section was teaching the schooling for the first, I think, 8 grades. And they had to teach the regular things that you do, arithmetic, science, English, geography. But they put a space theme on it. And instead of just arithmetic, it had a space type of arithmetic, whereby they had to figure out things, 1 spacecraft, 2 space, and the kids ate it up. They enjoyed it without realizing that they had to do that anyway, but it was just like the old days with dinosaurs. So that, and one of the things that the space program does for us, without looking at Mars or going back to the moon or putting guys up to the space station, is the rapport, the intercourse between various countries. The space station now is a consortium of some 16 countries working together, hopefully, if we ever get our shuttle working back again, of working together, learning and doing about the same thing, a project. We get a lot closer together with communications these days. What happens in this country affects all the other countries. What happens over there affects us. So working together on a project together gets it together. Look at the cooperation we have with the Russians now. The Russians are really supporting the space station now. Do you think that ever happened 10, 15 years ago? Oh my gosh. Well, maybe 20 years ago now, but I mean, these are the things that the program does for you. Sure, it's expensive, and I don't see myself, when the president announced we're going to give $1 billion to NASA right away, how they're going to do it. And I question some of that too. But the idea to keep that program going, I think is an incentive that we should all be proud of.
Fascinating hour or so to hear your story, and not just that, you've been very gracious with your time this entire day, spent some time earlier with a class, by the way, that I should mention at the Jepson School that's looking at the question of courage in leadership. And we thought he would be a very appropriate guest to meet with those students who are studying that question. So we will have a book signing right back there in just a few minutes, as soon as we get a chance to get settled, and I know many of you managed to purchase. In fact, I think we've actually run out of those. But those of you who are fortunate to get some, we will have a signing in just a few minutes. And join me once again in thanking Captain Lovell.